Let's try that again with the mic on this time. That is the second time this has happened. Hello everyone, welcome back to RWBY After the Fall, the Let's Read, by your host, Raymond McNeil. Of Celtic Phoenix Productions, I forgot that part. I read that first part perfectly, and then I forgot the mic was off, and it has been a rushed job. I only just got home in time for this. So you can tell I'm a little out of breath. Yes. In our last episode, things happened. Yes. Things certainly happened. That's about it, really. Well, that's the entire book for you. Things happened. The end. Which, honestly, is a surprise. You don't expect that in a RWBY story. Now, I'm actually kind of giving people a little bit time to just kind of scuttle in here because I did not really make the announcement of this very early on. So I want them to have a little time to get in here. Please share this around if you know anyone that would like to read along. And if you too have a copy of the novel, please feel free to read along yourself. I do believe, if I'm trying to remember the recap, because it has been since Tuesday since I have touched this, they have found the relocated Feldspar settlement. And Fox himself has separated from the group in order to try and find out who separated from the group in the middle of the desert. That in itself is an interesting preoccupation with things. That said, I believe this first chapter will go to our good friend Foxy Boy. I'll give people a little more time to kind of funnel in here. And I guess I can talk about a few things. One, I actually saw Spider-Man, Far From Home. Very good film. I had a blast of a time with it. There's some great moments in that. And I have seen a lot of the more recent RWBY news that's been coming out. I'm going to fix my jacket a little bit, my smoking jacket here. And yeah, smoking jacket, a proper smoking jacket. Not just a bathrobe. The new RWBY designs, I am keen on almost all of them except Yang's. Yang's I find is Night Monkey was the best character. I completely agree. He was best character, MVP of all time. Savior of the day. When it comes down to the new designs for RWBY, I'm actually liking all of them except Yang's, which I find is kind of like a One Piece kind of thing. It looks really weird to me. I'm not entirely sure if I don't think I like it very much. I think they're taking too much influence from the Cowboy Yang idea. I don't know how that's going to play out exactly. At least I just get that weird feel from it. I'm not sure why. That said, we have 11 viewers right now. Actually, this isn't surprisingly low. Let me double check this Twitter. Did I tweet this properly? Twitter. Oh, I think I tweeted it properly. I guess we're just gonna do it with a low body count here today. Blake's design was okay. I'm actually very happy with Ruby's redesign because he got rid of the boob window, which was one of the most annoying things to put on her, especially because she was like the one of them that was still technically underage depending on which district you're in. It's like, why take that risk? Why not just, have her more, give Yang the boob window, which I think she already had a boob window in the newer outfits. I like Weiss's the most, surprisingly. They copied some of the... they obviously copied notes from Vernal, that's for sure. The new writers I heard about give me a lot of pause, especially because I've seen some of their tweets, and they're both very politically active on a certain end of the spectrum, and I don't know how well that's going to actually play in the narrative, because they might try and Rian Johnson this up, and I really don't want them to do that. There's going to be a new novel, I hear. That's going to be a follow-up, I think, to After the Fall. We'll see if that's going to be a good or bad thing the more we get into this. And then, there's not really much else to announce. No new shorts. Release date's in November, so it is going to overlap at least partially with My Hero Academia, which will actually put it in direct competition with it. Mexico, it's only 15, is it? Strange. All right. I guess RWBY, put her in a sombrero and you're good to go. Don't take that advice, by the way, folks. That's a bad idea. Also, a horribly racist one. Well, I think 13 people is enough to get started. I'm not too keen on waiting around. I want to get this over with. I'm feeling a little bit tired today. It's been a long day, all things considered. So I want to just hop right into it, see if we can get through. Is it chapter 10 at the very least? We'll get through 10. We'll get through, it looks like, 11. And we might get through 12. Yeah, that's going to be what? We have page 176 all the way through page 214. So 176, 214. That's 40 pages, but maybe we can blast through chapter 3 as well. Chapter 13 as well. Ooh, chapter 13 is pretty damn long. How long is that? 229. So 229, 176. So on math for me real quick. That's about 50 pages. I think I can swing that. Let's try and get through chapter 13. Or chapter... Whatever, the 150... The 50 pages. Let's try and get through 50 pages. Let's just go with that, shall we? Okay, so... Oh, I just got a subscription from Silver Creation. Thank you, Silver Creation, for subscribing. Okay, here we go. Chapter 10. And it is a Fox chapter, by the way. You can see on the page here. Even though he has the least distinct silhouette of any of team aside from his weapon. He has the least interesting silhouette. The wind was rising, a hot wind, rustling Fox's hair and rushing by his ears. It seemed to be speaking to him in a whisper, and it howled in the distance. Howled. Wow, my voice is weird tonight. At the same time, he was finding it harder to breathe. The air felt heavier, thicker. The breeze for a moment felt good against his skin, and the intensity of the midday sun weakened. He marched on, pebbles and sand rising from the desert floor and pelting his legs. He had been caught out in a storm only once, with his uncle Copper, who had described these moments like the sand waking up. It rippled like muscles under the skin, rose in waves like an ocean tide, and like the tide, it could threaten to swallow you up, killing you and burying you all in one gesture. It would be a slow, painful, panicky death. A suffocation, nose and mouth filling with sand as you were buried alive. Somewhere in the distance, a bird squawked a warning before it flew off in search of shelter from the sandstorm. Fox was running out of time. Edward was running out of time. Fox couldn't get a good fix on Edward. He was tired, spurred on by desperation and adrenaline. There was definitely a mental presence ahead of him, coming in and out of Fox's awareness. He was fortunate that he could keep his eyes squeezed shut against the sand blasting into his face, rubbing the skin raw. Even being able to see wouldn't have been much help right now, with the rising wind whipping up the trail Koko and Yatsu had spotted, as well as his own footsteps. With his team split up and far away, with no way for them to find him, Fox suddenly felt vulnerable. It wasn't a good feeling. It reminded him too much of his childhood, of the life he left behind. He hadn't been alone, really alone, a single day since he had enrolled at Beacon Academy, and gone through his initiation. At least Fox had his scroll. He used it on a daily basis to get around whenever Koko and the others weren't in close proximity, and to mask the fact that he could sense others and place them in his mind as well as in the space around him. He plugged Ada's tiny earpieces into his ears and switched on the scroll. Tap to unlock, the accessibility dialogue assistant said in her mechanical, vaguely feminine voice. Fox tapped. He slid his thumb along the most common apps on the home screen and got it on the second try. Compass activated, Ada said. Thanks, Ada, Fox said. You're welcome, Fox. Fun fact, I actually assisted a man because I was a wheelchair assistant at the airport. I assisted a blind man twice, same guy. And it was very interesting how his phone worked, because the screen never turned on. The screen was all touchscreen, but he just operated it based solely on the sounds, and it was very interesting to watch as he just slid his finger along it and just knew exactly where to hit and when. Very, very cool technology when you get down to it, how the blind use modern tech. Fox kept walking forward. The sand kicked up around his shins now, and the wind tugged at his clothing and hair. He raised his hands to protect his face and pressed his mouth tightly shut. Each time he picked up a blip of a consciousness ahead, he adjusted his course and tapped the screen to lock in a trajectory. So when he went several minutes without another signal from the person he was following, he instructed Ada to beep softly if he strayed too far to the left or right as he pushed on. Beep! He heard a gentle tone in his right ear. Fox angled himself slightly left and continued. Beep! In his left ear. He turned 2 degrees to the right. He hoped whomever he was following was sticking to the same course. And then he tripped over a pile of sand. Only when he reached down and dug, he realized that it was a man huddled on the ground, his head buried in his knees. The sand had a way of quickly covering anything that wasn't moving. We have to keep moving, Fox said, getting a mouthful of sand in the process. He realized the wind in his ears had gotten louder, so he tried his semblance, but it failed him. He shouted instead, Are you all right? Can you get up? We have to keep moving! Fox's fingers danced at the man's head. Thinning hair tied in a ponytail. The beginning of a beard dusted with sand. Deep lines in his face filled with sand. Lips dried and cracked, coated in sand. There was a lot of sand. You see, that's a point where you could have inserted just a little more wryness of there was a lot of sand. Edward, Fox said. Please get up. Please, we have to find shelter. And I don't know where that is, he thought. They were screwed. Edward jolted awake and knocked Fox backwards. Metal scraped against metal as the old huntsman removed a weapon from his belt. Yeah! The man shouted, coming closer to Fox. Fox lifted his arm and just deflected Edward's weapon with a spark and a ringing sound. Hey! Fox shouted. Stop! I don't want to hurt you. Hey, don't shoot! I'm a human! If you get the reference, you're awesome. He leapt lightly to his leapt lightly to his feet, and backed away. It was difficult without a good beat on Edward's mind, but he paid attention to the sound of his footsteps, the way the wind sounded as it moved around an object. In this case, a person, as Edward circled Fox. You dragged me out here, but I'm not as weak as you thought, eh? Edward coughed. Fox needed more assistance. Ada, run Cyrano protocol, he shouted. Battle mode! Activating battle mode, Ada said. It had to be his imagination, but the limited artificial intelligence sounded excited. Describe, Fox said. Ada used the scroll tucked into his belt to analyze the environment, with the help of the scroll's camera and his earbud transceivers. One opponent, about 70 years old. Weapon, buckler. A small hand shield with a sharp metal edge. Update. Outer ring is removable. Update. Outer ring has been removed. Engage proximity alert. Engaged, Fox said, and then it says engaged. Fox had to disarm Edward, preferably without injuring him. He dashed forward, Ada's beeping letting him know how close he was to his opponent, and used other audio clues to update him on the position of Edward's weapon, head, fist, feet, and all other projected X and Y axis, and all on a projected X and Y axis that extended in a 5-foot radius around Fox. Heck, Celtic will mostly turn his head more than 2 degrees extreme for 90%. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm not looking up at the camera. I wish I had a stand. Maybe I should invest in a stand to hold the book up as I'm reading it. You know, something I can keep it here and then just flip through the pages. I'll look into that. Maybe I can do that. Especially if there's going to be another RWBY book. Why not? Cyrano was a sophisticated program out of Atlas, experimental tech the kingdom granted older academy students access for field testing. It had made Fox's life tremendously easier to navigate, though he often got more useful information from his teammates running commentary when the situation allowed for it. It was designed to adapt to Fox just as he adapted to it, and they were a pretty effective team, as long as he remembered to charge his scroll. Fox dashed forward. When he heard a steady tone in both his ears, he knew Edward was directly in front of him, and a low thrumming pulse told him where his hand holding his disc blade was. Fox jabbed his right elbow towards it, and hooked sharp retribution on the weapon. He pulled and twisted, yanking the disc away, but Edward held on with surprising strength. Fox heard a gunshot, and the emergency tone in his left ear made him jerk his head back. A bullet whizzed by his forehead. "Update," Ada said. "Weapon has projectile capabilities." "You mean it's also a gun?" "Imagine that." "Correct. Proceed with caution." "What do you think I've been doing?" Fox whipped his leg forward and knocked Edward to the ground. The old man grunted. As a fist connected with Fox's chest, but he pulled back just in time so it only made a glancing blow. He reached with his left hand, grabbed Edward's right, and pulled downwards. Edward lurched forward as Fox lifted his left knee. Edward's skull cracked against it, and Edward went down. But he didn't stay down. His weapon came up, and Fox parried it. Once, twice. Fox then took a chance and fired a shot of his own. He heard a bullet strike metal, and Edward cried out in surprise. The weapon flew a few feet away and landed in the sand. Edward dove for it. "Where is it? Where is it?" "Sorry," Fox said. "You all right?" Edward lifted his head and started to cough. "I know you, don't I?" The wind whipped his feeble voice away. Fox breathed a sigh of relief. "Yes. Finally." "You're Yatsuhashi, right?" Fox's shoulders fell. "Close. I'm Fox Alistar. Can you stand?" "Yes." Edward got to his feet, but only with Fox's help. "I'm sorry about that. I hope I didn't hurt you." "You're a formidable opponent." "Warning. Sandstorm imminent." "Thank you, Ada. Disengage battle mode," Fox said. "Who's Ada?" Edward said. "She's a voice in my head," Fox said. "We need to find shelter." Alright, that's just interesting way to phrase that, Fox. "There were some big rocks up ahead. They were weird shapes. The big one looked like a rubber ducky Gus used to have." He paused. "Gus, is he all right?" "I'm sure he's fine. Do you think you can find those rocks?" "Hold on, you can't see," Edward said. Fox usually feigned surprise whenever someone mentioned that, as though they were telling him something he didn't know, but they didn't have time for that now. "How did you even find me?" Edward asked. "Just my lucky day," Fox grimaced. They were really being buffeted by the wind now. He held on tight to the old man's arm, as much to keep him close as to keep him steady. "Lead on," he said. Fox gently nudged Edward forward. He kept his hand there as pressure to keep moving, and they gradually made their way across the desert. The wind abruptly died down, and Fox felt the temperature drop. "The sun's gone," Edward muttered. Then a short while later, Edward said, "Here they are," just as Ada's proximity alarm dinged softly to let know Fox he was about to walk into something solid. He moved forward slowly, hands outstretched. His fingers grazed a hard surface in front of him. He pressed his hand against the cool stone. Limestone. Patches of it were rough, others were worn smooth, and it seemed like a curve inward into a natural sort of lean-to. Sandstorms like this one had likely eroded it over hundreds of years. Fortunately, the wind was blowing from its opposite side this time. But that wouldn't matter much when the storm descended on them in earnest. "Where are we?" Edward asked. "How did we get here?" "You wandered off again from the group, after evacuating Feldspar, remember?" "That doesn't sound right. Where's Gus?" Edward asked. "He's back with Velvet and the others. I'll get him to you as soon as the storm dies down." Fox just hoped that it was one of those brief sandstorms. Some of them were known to last for days. "No, we can't wait a moment longer." Edward soon started venturing out. Fox grabbed his arm. Hold on, you have to stop doing that. I have to get back to them. They're all in danger. Everyone is in danger all the time here, Fox said. No, Edward said. He can't control his ability. He'll bring them again. I can't stop it. His ability, Fox frowned. Then he realized what the man was saying. Oh no, he thought. You mean Gus is the one who's amplifying people's emotions? Fox said. Yes! Edward slumped back into Fox's arms, as though he was exhausted and all his strength had suddenly left him. Don't lose it now, Edward, Fox thought. That means your semblance is to block other semblances, Fox said, which is why he had a hard time tracking Edward's consciousness in the desert and couldn't sense his mind even now. I've been blocking his ability since he was a small boy, but after his parents died it became more powerful, more difficult to control, more negative. And my own semblance has been weakening. I can't keep him in check anymore, especially when he's stressed. Okay. I kind of saw this coming. Which is all the time out here, Fox said. Why did you two lie about this? It was my idea to protect Gus, Edward said. If anyone figured out we were the ones causing the mood bombs and drawing the Grim, I made him agree to tell them it was my fault. Fox understood. If somebody decided to try and stop the bombs in the most expedient way, Gus likely would have been killed. Besides, it wasn't always a good idea to reveal your semblance to strangers. Lots of huntsmen, like Velvet, tended to keep that information secret to give them an edge in combat. Others, such as Yatsu, weren't proud of their ability or didn't want others to judge them for it. And with a semblance as dangerous as Gus's, it made it sense for Edward to paint a large target on his own back instead of the kids, until they got someplace far enough away from people that it wouldn't matter anymore. But what kind of life would they live out there in the voluntary exile? It was a waste of potential, a waste of life. Edward was right, though. They had to get back to the evacuees. They were under a tremendous amount of stress, and with his grandfather missing, Gus was bound to lose it and set the Grim back on their trail. We can make it, Fox said. The storm's just beginning. We'll have to hurry. Maybe it wouldn't be too bad. Edward pulled himself up against again and groaned. We won't get lost in the storm? Edward asked. Fox stepped out from the rocks into the diving winds. I never get lost, he said. Then someone large and heavy dropped down on him from above. The proximity alarm whined in Fox's ears as he stumbled to his knees in the sand, ham-sized fists beating the side of his head. Okay. Is it Bertolac, maybe? Is Bertolac doing this now? Oh, yeah. Just get Crow on this. Just punch the shit out of Gus. That's what I do. Chapter 11 is the Beacon. It's a Beacon chapter. And Blade Charge asks, what camera are you using? It is a Logitech camera. Let me briefly look that up. How's everyone enjoying the stream, by the way? Everything going good? Everyone having a good time? Logitech webcams. I don't know if I have the name. There's that. The C920. Something like it. It's, no, here we go. The C920 Logitech webcam. It's one of my favorites. I think I have an older version of it, but it's been one of the most wonderful experiences having it. It doesn't carry audio very well, but if you're okay with using a separate mic like I do, which I didn't mean to knock that, so you're going to hear that. That's, what I suggest using a kind of a dual setup. You got a microphone and a camera. There's no booze in the desert, so Crow has no motive, but you can actually make alcohol out of cactus. Tequila comes from the desert, don't forget. Just offer him some of that good stuff and you're good to go. Oh yeah, it's a wonderful camera. I think it's only about $50. I didn't spend too much on it. And that might sound like a lot. When you're in video production, a lot of things, the prices of things can get really high. This is a pretty cheap but effective webcam, so I highly recommend the C920. It's very good. I don't know if we're getting new John, Nora, and Ren designs in Volume 7. No, watch them come out with a new Pyrrha design. Just with the shiggles. It's like, this is Pyrrha in Volume 7. And everyone's like, what? And then she never shows up. She never shows up. It's just she's just mentioned in development. That would be the trolliest thing on the planet. I would love them if they did that. First good Bora design. What the fuck is Bora? Alright, well, chapter 11. It's a beacon chapter. Well, I'm lost. Fox sent. Coco tossed her hands in the air. Fantastic. She put her gun down and sat on a rock. She leaned forward with her She leaned forward with her elbows on her knees, hands clasped, and tried to think of a plan. They'd already had a plan. The village of Lower Karin had sent a distress call saying they were being attacked by Grimm. They were escaping, but they needed protection. Coffee was supposed to go in, find the survivors, and bring them back to Vale. It should have been straightforward. Nothing they hadn't handled before, but there had been too many Grimm. More Grimm than any of them had ever seen in a single place before. And Lower Karin was just Karin. Lower Karin, Cairn, Kirin. Lower Karin was just gone. And no, they did not show a character short. Usually when a village was attacked, even destroyed and abandoned, most of its buildings remained. Houses, shops, restaurants. Ruins of temples and cities persisted all over Remnant, ensuring signs that people had lived there. But Lower Karin had been flattened. All but a couple of stone buildings on the outskirts had been reduced to rubble and splinters, like a great hand had come down and swept it aside as easily as a child knocking down a block tower. It was shocking in its implied malice and brutality, and they couldn't imagine what could cause such devastation. That had shaken the team, of course, but it was the sight of the dozens of Ursai and Beowulfs roaming the trampled streets in broad daylight, dark parodies of the townspeople who had lived there only days before, that had really unnerved Coco, Fox, Velvet, and Yatsuhashi. Fox didn't even have any jokes that could lighten the situation. Coco had ordered them to avoid engaging the Grimm, which felt like a defeat in and of itself. They were huntsmen in training. They were supposed to fight these things, but if they began fighting, they could quickly be overwhelmed. Even so, their low spirits and anxiety had drawn the attention of some of the demons. So as they hiked towards the mountains and searched for survivors, they were harassed by an increasing number of Grimm. It was just a matter of time before there would be too many of them, and that they would have to abandon their mission. So far, they had only picked up fragments of the trail towards the mountains. Broken branches, footprints in the mud, threads snagged on branches in the underbrush. Then the trail ran cold, and it looked like they would have to give up, but Fox had insisted they would find the village with its semblance. I don't get it. They should be right here, Fox sat down next to Coco. I guess you're slightly oversold your ability to track survivors, Coco said. He shrugged. I know someone's out there, but the signal's weak. I think the mountain passes are causing interference, like the buildings back in Vale. Either that or... What? Velvet asked. There aren't enough survivors to get a good fix on them. The longer it takes to locate them, the fewer there'll be, Coco said. Maybe we should call it in. Not yet, Coco said. We've been out here for 10 days. We should have been back by now. Professor Port had finally contacted them and shooed Coco out for not reporting in. She had snapped that they were in a precarious position, with Grimm all around them. It wasn't exactly convenient to talk. And as if to punctuate her point, Coffee had been attacked by a pair of Barangles, incredibly strong and vicious ape-like Grimm. They had to cut off the call with Port, with barely enough time for Velvet to ask him to tell Yang and Weiss that they were going to be too late to set up for the beacon dance. He had sputtered and told them to keep their minds on the job, and that there were more important things than the dance. If they couldn't handle it, he would be sending an extraction team. Velvet and Yatsuhashi looked around. They looked up into the sparse trees, into the rocky terrain rising on either side of the narrow passage they were in. There was no place where even a single person could hide, let alone a large group of people. Suddenly, a creep rounded the corner and rushed for Velvet. She was so startled she stepped backwards, stumbled over a rock, and went down, barely rolling out of the way of its attack. She scrambled up into a crouch as the two-legged Grimm skidded and turned to face her. There was no time for her to pull a weapon. She squinted, estimated her best time to jump to clear it on its next charge. It barreled towards her, faster than she had expected, faster than it should be possible for someone like that to move. "I hate these things!" Yatsuhashi shouted. Then his greatsword smashed into it, with enough concussive force to not only definitively obliterate it, but to make the ground shake and fracture the bedrock in an 8-foot radius around them. The blast sent Velvet tumbling back head over heels. A flying piece of stone, or skull, smacked into her forehead. She lay on her back, winded and dazed. "Velvet!" Yatsuhashi dropped his sword with a heavy clang and rushed to her side. "I'm okay," she said. "I'm sorry," he said. He frowned. "This is starting to get to me." She put a hand on his cheek. "It's all right." None of them had much of a chance to rest, let alone sleep. The constant barrage of Grimm was getting too close, getting to her too. She knew Yatsu needed time to recenter himself to take control of his anxiety. "It's not all right. You got hurt," he said. "I'm more annoyed that you took my kill. Again," she teased. "I wanted to help." "I know." Yatsuhashi stood and reached down to pull her up. "Seriously, what was that?" Coco asked. "Velvet, pay more attention." "What?" Velvet said, shocked. "Have you noticed we're in hostile territory?" "Of course, but..." "Then how did you let a creep sneak up on you like that?" "Hey, go easy," Yatsuhashi said. "We're all right." "And you," Coco went on. "You went a little overboard on that kill. Save your strength. There's no one to show off for out here. There's no one to show off for out here." "He didn't do that on purpose," Velvet said. "Then he needs to control himself better," Coco said. "He knows that!" Velvet's nostrils flared. "He spends every moment of every day trying to control his strength. He doesn't need you to tell him what to do. None of us do. Look where it's gotten us." A stunned silence fell on the group. "I'm your leader," Coco said. "Leading means more than bossing us around," Fox sent, "or getting on our cases when we fail to live up to your absurdly high expectations." "It's not like you guys have come up with any better ideas," Coco said. "How can we when you never even offer us the chance? If you want us to trust you, then you need to trust us." "We're a team, aren't we?" Well, Velvet nodded, then she says, "We're a team, aren't we?" Oh, Lord. That's cracking into my bottle water. "Yeah, but I'm responsible for keeping you alive," Coco said. "We're responsible for keeping each other alive," Fox said. "And we share the..." He held up a hand. "Shh. Listen." "What is it?" Coco said back. Fox started walking down the mountain path so softly his footsteps didn't make a sound. Velvet's rabbit ears twitched and rotated, orienting to the sound. "I heard it too," she said. "Follow us." As I went deeper into the passage, the others heard it too. Faint voices calling for help. The voices led Fox to a narrow crevice in the side of a mountain, maybe 1.5 feet across. "Hello?" Velvet called inside. There was quiet for a moment, then several voices accompanied by cheering and sobbing. "One at a time," Velvet said. "We can't hear you." "Thank the brothers you found us," a man's voice called. "We're trapped underground. Part of the tunnel caved in a minute ago." Coco glared at Yatsuhashi. He rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. Okay, that's kind of funny. "Are you from Lower Curran?" Coco asked. "Yes, the Grimm attacked, destroyed the village. It was so fast." "How many are with you?" Velvet asked. There was no answer. "Hello," she called again. "There's only 6 of us." More sobbing drifted up from the cave. "Only 6. Coco slumped into the ground beside the crack in the mountain. "Over 200 people lived in Lower Curran," Velvet said. "My gods," Fox sent. I don't know why, that just cracked me up. "My gods. A bomb. What a shame." Maybe there are more survivors. Yatsu looked down the mountain path. It was enough of a miracle that they had found these, but it made it even more important to come to them. "Are you hurt?" Velvet asked. "My wife sprained her ankle and my son needs medicine," the man called. We are very hungry and thirsty." Actually, that's a good question. Your blade charge talking about the brother gods. Do they know about the gods? Which gods are we talking about? Are we talking about a different pantheon here? That's because they hid religion. Remember, that was a big deal in Volume 4. They hid religion. So see, I turned my head more than 2 degrees. I did that. Hungry and thirsty. "We're coming to you," Velvet said. "We'll get to you." She removed her camera and started to lower herself through the opening. Coco put a hand on her shoulder. "Hold on. What are you doing?" "We can't waste any more time," Velvet said. "This is what we came here for." Coco shook her head. "Velvet, you're hurt," she said softly. "I'm fine." Velvet briefly closed her eyes as a wave of nausea and dizziness washed over her. "No one else can squeeze through this opening." "I can make it wider." Yatsuhashi reached for a sword. "You're more likely to finish the job and bring the tunnel down than the rest of the way," Coco said. "I'm just as small as you, Velvet. Shorter if you don't count the ears. Maybe a little thinner, too." "Hey!" "Besides, the team will need you and Fox's hearing to find another entrance and locate me and the survivors. I'll go. This is all my fault anyway, right?" "I didn't mean that," Velvet said. "You did, and you were right." She looked around. "Your semblance led us right, Fox. The survivors were exactly where you thought they were, only they were under us. I'm sorry for doubting you." Fox nodded. "When we get out of here, we should probably all have a long talk," Coco said. "We have some things to work out." Velvet crawled out of the crevice. Coco peered inside. She took off her sunglasses. "Sure is dark down here, isn't it?" She hoped no one heard her "Sure is dark down there, isn't it?" She hoped no one heard the tremble in her voice. The others pretended they didn't. She put her glasses on Velvet. "Hold on to these for me. Don't scratch them." Coco scraped, pushed, and pulled her way through the tiny opening, sucking in her stomach and holding her breath. She slid down a steep slope, sending rocks and pebbles falling with her, and dropped down, much further than she had expected. She looked up at the silver light about 10 feet above her head. There was no getting back up there. "The only way out is through," she said. Her voice echoed eerily around her. The light disappeared briefly, and a second later Coco caught her bag. She immediately felt better. "You all right?" Fox sent. Coco's hands shook as she fumbled with her scroll. She had a phobia for dark and enclosed spaces ever since she was young. She and her brothers had been playing hide-and-seek, and Coco had hidden in a small cabinet under the sink. After she had waited for a long time for one of them to find her, she tried to crawl out to see what had happened to Mate and Toma, but the door wouldn't budge. It had gotten stuck, and they didn't hear her calls for help or the pounding of her bare feet against the door as she tried to get it open. Her father eventually found her after she had begun banging on the pipes under the sink, and the sound traveled down to his workshop. Later she found out her younger brother, Mate, had looked for her in that cabinet, but he'd given up when he couldn't open it and assumed she had run off in the middle of the game. Mate and Toma. Interesting. Coco scrolled it up. Weak signal, the screen read. She turned on the flashlight function and light flooded the cavern. Now it wasn't quite so dark, but the space was only a few feet across. She couldn't tell how far along it went. It was cool and wet down there, and dust drifted down from the ceiling, with the occasional pebble dropping and clattering against some stone. "Over here!" the man's voice called. The echo bounced around her and magnified, making it difficult to pinpoint the source. That was a one-way trip, Coco sent. Allowing Fox to broadcast her words to Velvet and Yatsuhashi. "I'll have to find the survivors in another exit." Holding there for a moment, I want to make a note. I actually recognize that phobia. I was actually locked in the crawl space of a boat, of like a motorboat, when I was like 3 or 4 by my older sister. And that was one of the most nerve-wracking experiences of my life, because I think I was in there for at least like half an hour, maybe even more than that. regardless, it messed up my sense of being for some time after that, and I only got over it when I was in my mid-teens, about fear and claustrophobia. Still don't like enclosed spaces very much, don't like dark spaces, but I can get used to them so much that I can cave dive now. Don't like it so much, but I can get a kick out of it. Back to the book. We'll look from outside and make a new opening if we have to, Fox sent. Drop my pack before you go. It once again got darker, and then Coco's backpack landed on the rocks in front of her. There wasn't much food and water left, since they've been here longer than planned, but it was more than the survivors would have eaten in days. Coco moved down the passage, trying to think about how much closer the walls were getting the deeper she went. She splashed through the shallow pools. Okay. I'm going to guess the villagers are actually dead, and that there was something, like, there's a mockingbird grim down here. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt again. She splashed through the shallow pools of water dripping on her face. And water dripped on her face. Water must have carved these caves over the centuries, which meant there must be another opening in the other direction, which let water flow in during heavy rains, maybe even opened onto a river. She found the lower Kedding survivors in a hollowed-out dead end. Okay, so no, never mind. I was wrong. Oops. I'm Coco, she said. I'm from Beacon Academy. Oh, you're a student, the man asked. We thought you were a huntress. I'm a huntress in training, Coco said, but we're the best at Beacon. Thank you for coming. He introduced himself as Linus Gray, and the other survivors, his wife, Rhea, his son, Leander, and his 3 daughters, Phoebe, Helen, and Cleo. One family was all that was left of Lower Kedding. Coco realized. She and Coffee had heard of the worst outcomes in the history lessons from Dr. Oobleck. Some of her classmates had been lone survivors of a grim attack. A common motivation for people to train as huntsmen was for revenge, because they had nothing more to lose, or because they wanted to make sure no one else had to suffer the same fate. Linus and his family eagerly ate the meager supplies Coco had brought, and finished the water in her canteen. Then it was time to move on. She led them past the crack she'd come through. She kicked herself. She shouldn't have been using the light the whole time. The screen's glow was dimming, but she didn't want to go without it, either worried about what might be waiting in the darkness. But she hadn't wanted to go without it either, worried about what might be waiting in the darkness. Now she didn't have a choice. She would have to push on, fears or no fears. Knowing the family of 6 was depending on her, and her team helped keep her moving. We found a way in, and we're on our way towards you, Fox said. Great, Coco said. My friends are coming, she told the family. They sped up until the battery on her scroll died. Then they proceeded more slowly along the passage. Coco was glad it was dark, because the family couldn't see how scared she was, stumbling and helpless in the cavern. How are you doing? Fox said. Fine. Coco was fine. Coco was glad she didn't have to speak aloud. He definitely would have heard her voice shaking. Lost our light, but there seems to be only one way to go. Should we be meeting up soon? Can you try making some noise so we know how far you are? Yatsuhashi sent. Coco saw a soft orange light ahead. Oh, never mind. I see your light, she says. Come on, she called over her shoulder. They hurried towards the light. The path opened up into a large cavern. Somewhere, the water plopped rhythmically into a pool. Light? We don't have a light, Fox said. Yatsu's following Velvet, and I'm using my semblance. Coco froze. Go back, she whispered urgently. Go back, she whispered urgently to the family. But it was too late. The light above their heads was like a golden lantern, was joined by 2 glowing red stilts in the darkness. That was joined by 2 glowing red slits, not stilts. Show you how confident I am at reading today. A Death Stalker, Coco shouted. Rhea screamed and her child began crying. We hear you, Fox said. Did you say Death Stalker? Yes! Hurry! The orange light moved farther away, and then it zipped towards Coco. She was mesmerized by it, enough that she didn't move until someone pushed her aside, and she fell into the cavern wall. Linus grunted and cursed. The grim scorpion tail had pierced his leg, pinning him to the ground. Rhea grabbed his arm and pulled as the Deathstalker's stalker advanced, claws clacking. Damn, Coco said as she opened her gun and tracked the Deathstalker. Then she fired. The gunshots were deafening. The tunnel shook and dirt and stone raining down around them. Stop! Rhea shrieked. You'll bring it down upon us on top of all of us. A rock slab fell a foot in front of Coco. She stopped firing and stumbled backwards, coughing. If she had boosted the impact of her bullets, they could probably all be dead. She didn't even think she'd hit the Deathstalker. She had been firing blindly out of panic. She blinked, her eyes clear of sweat and grit. She couldn't see the Deathstalker. Her finger trembled on the trigger. She closed her weapon up on the handbag. It was going to have to be hand-to-hand combat. She fought to control her breathing. Then something flickered in her peripheral vision. She jumped and whirled, bringing her bag around. A claw came at her from the darkness, and she froze. At the last second, she swung her bag up, whacking the claw out of the way. She spun away from it, losing track of the Deathstalker's location again. She had to calm down and listen. Coco, we're here, Fox sent. Don't shoot us. Are you okay? Yatsuhashi asked. We heard the gunfire. The rest of the team had arrived, and they had brought light. Coco flinched as a flashlight illuminated the space. No, not a flashlight, but velvet and a hard light weapon in a copy of Yatsuhashi's sword. That was better. The cavern was wider than it seemed, but there wasn't a lot of room to maneuver. Fox hacked at the Deathstalker's legs with his weapons, doing little more than distracting it. Yatsuhashi pulled the stinger out of Linus's legs, and the man crawled away with his wife's help. Velvet slashed the Deathstalker's tail with her glowing sword. It scraped against the Grimm's hard exoskeleton, again doing little damage, but getting it to turn towards her. Fox and Velvet traded off blows, keeping the Deathstalker moving back and forth between them. Oh, they're exploding the AI. Good on them. When I fire, run, Coco said. Hold on, Yatsuhashi said. She fired, drying out whatever he was going to say. This time she didn't hold back, and the Deathstalker crumbled under her explosive rounds. Unfortunately, so did the tunnel. Run, she said again, unable to hear her own voice over the falling stone and the ringing in her ears. They ran. Careful, it's slippery up ahead, Fox said. Coco ran and slipped on a muddy slope, the stone of the cave giving way to soft earth bathed in moonlight. She came out on a bank of a stream just above the rushing water. Velvet was just ahead of her, knee deep in the middle of a stream with Linus and his family. They were surrounded by Ursai. Velvet was now brandishing a pair of hard-light daggers. Why'd you pick those, Velvet? Coco muttered. She needed to get better at sizing up her enemies and choosing the best weapon and fighting style to take them down. An Ursai snapped at Velvet, and she smacked it in the side of the head with one dagger, knocking it back. It shook its head, lunged for her again, and she threw the second dagger into its open mouth. The glowing blade protruded from the back of its head. The red faded from its eyes, and it went down. Velvet turned and tilted her head at Coco, eyebrows raised. Another Ursa attacked. Velvet parried its blows with her remaining dagger. Fox sped ahead of Yatsuhashi and Coco and took down an Ursa with a series of jabs and slashes from his arm blades. Yatsuhashi skewered the one beside it and tossed it away from its pack. The refugees ran through the opening in the ring of Grimm towards Coco. What are you doing? She hollered. She lay down covering fire as three Ursai pursued the family. Linus fell, and Rhea and Leander went back for him. She yelled something at the children, and they ran on. Coco picked one of the Grimm off, and then another, but then her gun clicked. She needed to reload. I mean, if all your ammo is carried in the same bag, and it's a chain felt... Fine, need to reload, whatever. You should never have to reload a Gatling gun if you do it right. No! She shouted as the third Ursa grabbed Linus in its teeth. The man howled, and then he went silent. Rhea collapsed to her knees, screaming. The Ursa turned on her, but a glowing hard-light dagger caught it in the back. It spun and faced Velvet as the blade vanished. She fiddled with her camera for a moment before summoning another weapon, a recreation of Skylark's halberd. She lowered the axe head and fired around at the Ursa, giving Rhea time to run away. The kids passed Coco as she reloaded and joined Velvet in firing on the Ursa. They held behind her, silent and wide-eyed, until their mother joined them. Get away from here, Coco shouted. More Grimm were descending into the valley, boxing in Coffee and the family they were trying to protect. We can't handle them, Coco said, because they had to. We can handle them, Coco said. Not can't. Can. Because they had to. Then the ground rumbled behind her. Coco turned. She looked up, and up, and up. For the first time she thought she was about to die. On the other side of the stream, Velvet froze. That sounds bad, Fox said. It's very bad. A Goliath, Yatsuhashi said. The shadowy Goliath lumbered up the banks of the river, looming over Coco and the family, who looked tiny in comparison. Its bone-white faceplate was streaked with red, and had one massive curved tusk. The other had been broken halfway, but splintered at the end, just as sharp and deadly looking. Now they knew what must have destroyed Lower Karin, and it was there to finish the job. The gray children shouted. Velvet snapped out of it and watched as the family scrambled back into the cave. No! Coco shouted. The Goliath advanced towards the stream. Coco fired her gun at it, but it didn't seem fazed at all. It slid down the slope, crushing the cavern entrance and the people inside. Velvet dropped to her knees. Oh no. No, she said. The halberd fell to the ground and faded away. Yatsuhashi ran towards the Goliath, sword raised. Hold on, Fox sent! He looked up. A bullhead descended towards them, firing heavy artillery at the Goliath, pushing it back. Professor Port crouched in the opening door of the transport, firing his blunderbuss at the grim around Velvet and Fox. Get in! He shouted. Coco, Yatsuhashi, we have to go! Velvet shook her head, climbing to her feet. No. We have to fight! She flipped through her camera, searching for the right weapon that could solve everything. We have to leave, Fox sent. He pulled on her arm. We have to live. She shoved him away. No! We can still save them! We can... They're gone, Fox said. I can't sense them anymore. Velvet choked back a sob and followed him. I don't retreat, Coco said. I'll hold them off. Don't be stupid, Fox said. Yatsuhashi winced. He looked at Coco. Save it. There's no convincing her, Yatsuhashi said. Thank you. Coco started to head back towards the fight. Then she felt herself swept up in Yatsuhashi's arms. Yatsuhashi, put me down! Yatsuhashi winced as Coco's blows landed hard on his shoulders. Sorry. She was too strong for him to hold on for long. He ran towards the bullhead, which laid down covering fire that cut through the scattering earthside. The Goliath had turned and was walking away slowly, as if it weren't even worth paying attention to anymore. Yatsuhashi hurled Coco into the airship and jumped in after her. As it flew up and banked towards home, they looked down at the ruins of Lower Karin. We failed, Velvet said. And with that, I'm going to get a drink, and I'll be right back. Catch you guys in just a second. Hello, and we are back. Bravely. Well, not bravely. We're back for good now. Hopefully. That should be the only break I need to make. But let's try and get back into this. A minute. Yeah, stomach's upset. Ate a lot of pizza tonight. So it's not settling very well. It's a Velvet chapter today. Let's get to it. Oh, for the record, chapter 11 there was fantastic. I actually really liked that. That was horrifying. Horrifying. Absolutely showing just how scary the Grimm should be in this series. Honestly, that was absolutely awesome. And everything that I had imagined the Grimm being. Alright, here we go. Chapter 12. From inside the wagon racing across the desert, Velvet watched as the blue sky turned to sickly orange-gray. The sun was a dull, bright orb overhead. The van shuddered as the wind rocked it. The sand outside was undulating. It drifted across the peaks and dunes around them, rising and whirled in flurries around the group. It was magical. It was terrifying. "We aren't going to make it," Slate said. "We will," Coco said. Slate tapped the dashboard. "We're almost out of fuel. We don't have enough to get to the canyon. We'll have to lash the vehicles together and shelter inside them." She squinted. "But this looks like a really bad one." They trundled along while they considered all their options, which seemed fairly limited. "What if we could get above the sand?" Velvet asked. "You have an Airbus on call we don't know about?" Coco asked. Velvet pointed. "I was thinking more about climbing the plateau." I was thinking more about climbing the plateau." "I know this desert, kid, and there's no plateaus in these parts," Slate said. "Then what is that?" Yatsu looked in the direction Velvet was gazing. It was hazy out there, visibility dropping as the air filled with sand. He shaded his eyes and waited for a clearer view. "She's right, there's something out there. It's huge with a flat top and 5 outcroppings," Yatsu said. He blinked. "But I think it's moving." Slate pulled out a pair of binoculars from the compartment beneath her seat. Velvet noticed a pistol tucked in the back before she closed the door. "Where?" Slate asked. Velvet pointed. Slate's mouth fell open. "Well, I'll be. That's no plateau. That's a flatback slider." A what?" Coco asked. "You mean it's alive?" "Alive and very rare in these parts. I've only ever seen it once in my life. When I was a little girl, from a distance. It could even be the same one." "But what is it?" Velvet asked. "A sand turtle," Slate said. "One big enough to ride on." "You mean tortoise?" Yatsu asked. Slate gave him a look. "If I'd meant a tortoise, I would have said tortoise, young man. That there is a turtle. It's not walking on the sand, it's swimming in it. And by the looks of it, it's trying to get away from the sandstorm, same as us. It'll travel for a bit and then direct its head and wait it out. It's so big it'll hardly notice it, but the sand has shaped it too, over time, just like the rocks in canyon. This is a cool monster idea." The sandstorm was coming from the other side of the turtle, driving it northeast along the same path they were taking. "You said it was big enough to ride on," Velvet asked. Yatsu stared at her. "You're bonkers," he said. "We're desperate," Coco corrected him, "and I happen to think this is a terrific idea." "Me too," Slate said. "The sandstorm typically reaches around 50 to 60 feet. We could ride above the storm easily." "And how high up is the back of that turtle?" I don't know who said that one. "Probably 100 feet, Slate said. Slate fell silent, considering. Then she yanked the wheel, angling the van to the right. "We might have enough fuel to intercept it, and I've always wanted to see one up close." The other vans adjusted course to follow them, a long line stretching behind them, sending up a sand cloud of their own. Velvet had to admire Slate. Her people were following her without question. Velvet glanced at Coco. Coco smiled. "Are we doing this?" Velvet asked. "Oh, we are doing this," Coco said. They gradually caught up to the turtle. When they were running on fumes, they passed in front and clambered out of the vehicle to wait for it. The rest of the caravan joined them, gaping at the humongous creature as they crawled from the vans. It was slow moving, maybe going 10 miles an hour. It was hard work swimming through sand, even with the storm at your back. Carmine approached with Gus. They'd been traveling in the van behind slates. What are we doing? And what fresh headache is this? Carmine gazed at the turtle, drifting towards them with a mixture of awe and terror. Slate caught her up on the plan. Gus's eyes went wide. You're climbing it? We're climbing it, Coco said. Crazy enough to work. Who's going up first? Carmine asked. Any of us can make it up that thing without much trouble, but what about them? She swept a hand to include the townspeople clustering and muttering. The sand was swirling around their ankles now, already piled up around the wheels of the wagons. They wouldn't be moving them anytime soon, even if they had enough fuel. Good point. We'll have to send someone up to secure lines to get everyone else to the top, Coco said. Are these turtles dangerous? Now you ask. I don't think so. I hear they're only dangerous if they see you, Slate said. Fortunately, they have terrible vision, and they usually ignore tiny, short-lived things like us. She may be as old as the Great War. So this'll work, Coco said. Side note, there's so much in this story that could be solved with the proper application of a rope. Remember, everyone that plays D&D and every derivative thereof of a tabletop role-playing system, always carry at least 50 foot of rope and a grappling hook on you at all times. It is my go-to tip, because you never understand how useful that could be in the most ridiculous of situations. Continuing. I've heard of some people who just camp on these for days or weeks. There's no better way to travel through the desert if you're lucky enough to find one. Just seeing one is considered a good omen. We can use a good omen right now, Coco said. I'll go first, Velvet cut in. Coco considered her. Velvet braced herself for the protest, the insistence that she go instead. But Coco grinned. Go. Velvet loaded her belt with tough but light ropes that had been intended for tying the vans together for shelter. If all went well, they would be much safer above the storm. She bounced on her heels, getting ready to climb up the front of the turtle slowly. She bounced on her heels, getting ready to climb as the front of the turtle slowly slid past them. Slate was right. It never even looked down or took notice of them. They were basically insignificant as bugs. You sure about this, V? Yatsu asked. She nodded. Give me a boost? You got it. Yatsu stepped back from the turtle a bit as he and drew his sword. He held it in both hands and slung the broad, flat side of the blade over his shoulder like a baseball bat. Good luck, Coco said. It's supposed to be good luck to see one, isn't it? Velvet said. So climbing must be really lucky. I hope so. Gus smiled at Velvet. I'm worried, but I think you can do it. Thanks. She ruffled Gus's curly hair, and he ducked his head. Then she jumped up on Yatsu's shoulder and walked along his greatsword. She crouched on the flat blade close to the tip. Ready! Ready! Velvet called. Yatsu swung, low, then high, and fast, as his arms fully extended with the sword pointing straight out. Velvet launched herself, using the momentum to carry herself 25 feet up. She landed on one of the turtle's massive flippers. Already a quarter of the way up, Velvet thought. Thanks, Yatsu. She could barely tell that she and the turtle were moving, but when she looked down, she saw her friends following along beside it at a brisk pace. They wouldn't be able to keep going forever, and the wind was starting to pick up. Velvet's face itched as sand brushed against it. The giant flipper she stood on was firm. She knelt and pressed her hand against it. It was definitely warm and alive, but the creases in the tough skin, which the texture of rubber tire, were filled with sand and rocks. The sand turtle was the color of the desert it swam in, rich oranges and yellows and reds. She felt the powerful strength of the animal as its muscles worked to propel it through the shifting earth below. As Velvet raced up the flipper, she thought that racing up a gargantuan turtle swimming in the desert had to be one of the most exciting things she had ever done. Her speed carried her to the lower lip. To the lip of the turtle's shell. She grabbed it, turned herself around, and then flipped her legs up and over so she was standing on the edge. The obsidian shell was worn down here, almost glass-like. She was maybe 40 feet up now, still on the edge of where sandstorms would have blasted it smooth. The dim sun glinted off of it, and Velvet saw her image reflected in the surface, warped like in a funhouse mirror, so she appeared shorter and whiter, a cartoonish version of herself. It was slippery, so she had to jump and catch a handhold. Higher up, the shell was pockmarked and pitched, the black and gray coloration around faded by exposure to the sun. Then there were natural ridges and joints that made it straightforward but arduous work to climb. Slow and steady now, she thought. Falling would not only likely injure her but also delay her progress, and they were nearly out of time. She was above the storm line now, and the air felt lighter and fresher than it did below. The full heat of the sun returned, and the sky was once again blue. She glanced down as she moved upwards, and couldn't see the ground through the thick layer of soup of hot wind and sand swirling below her. And then she crested the shell and sprawled on her back for a moment, catching her breath. She sat up and looked out on the desert. On one side, the thick cauliflower clouds of sand were almost upon them. Below her, the ground was still obscured by a dismal layer of sand and dust. She hoped her friends and the townspeople were okay. Farther out, the desert looked as it usually did, untouched and unbothered by anything happening here and now. The desert was old, and it would outlast all of them, all of the people Velvet knew or would ever know. It wasn't uncaring, it was indifferent. I mean, they're not exactly synonyms, but they're not exactly antonyms either. That's a weird clarification to make. Everything that they held dear and struggled for, the battles with Grimm, the other kingdoms, with Cinderfall and the White Fang, and their mysterious allies, none of that mattered to Vacuo, the desert or the creatures who roamed it. She didn't fight. How does she know who Cinderfall is? That's the biggest plot hole in this. I don't know where she's getting this information that she knows all these like big evil deal things. Velvet found the thought sobering. It gave her some perspective on what had happened at Beacon and ever since. No matter what she did, wherever she lived or died, the desert would always abide. Like the dude. But it all mattered to her, and the people below who were counting on her. She wandered the sun-bleached surface of the shell, as flat and stable as any plateau, and blissfully free of sand. Astonishingly, there were abandoned tents here, evidence of campfires and even trash. Something must have happened to the people who left the stuff here, as Vacuums were typically more respectful and less wasteful than anyone else. She poked her head into one of the tents and grimaced. She had found the last people on to scale this monstrous beast. A couple lying on worn pallets reduced to skeletons by birds or insects, still wearing the threadbare clothing they had died in. Velvet closed the flap and backed away. She tripped over something. Clumsy, she said. But what had she tripped over? The center of the shell had a number of pythons driven into it. Perfect, she thought. She hoped it hadn't hurt the turtle whenever that was done, and she hoped it wouldn't hurt it if she used them to secure her ropes. She tied off the ends of the two long lines and then returned to the edge. She threw them over the side and then watched as they arced out and tumbled through the rising layer of blowing sand below. She felt like she was fishing. One line went taut, then the other. They had hold of them. Velvet continued to explore the shell. It was about an acre in size, plenty of room for all the settlers and then some. She worked her way to the forefront and watched the back of the turtle's head as it slowly bobbed back and forth, backward and forward with its motion. Backward and forward, dude, say back and forth. It's fine. It's okay. Watching it made her feel slightly queasy, and she looked past it. The sand on the horizon was moving concentric circles, almost too slowly to detect, like the gradual motion of a clock's hand. The wild country was dotted with clusters of wagons and tents, but nothing as large as Feldspar had been. She saw an oasis far to the east, perhaps the one that Carmine and Bertolak had talked about. She saw the canyons to the west, their original destination. There were patches of green scrub dotting the landscape, belying the desert as a lifeless place. Birds winged in the distance. Winged in the distance, I guess. Can you tell I'm a little tired? I'm not reading quite as clearly as I should be able to. Oh, wow, we just jumped up to 20 people. That came out of nowhere. Hi, everyone. How's it going? Vacuo could look beautiful, it turned out, when looked at from above. And there in the distance, a four-leveled pyramidal structure rose up from above the desert. Shade Academy. She didn't feel the same way looking at it as when she thought of Beacon Tower, but she had been living there for more than a year, and the familiarity was reassuring. She even missed it, she supposed. Velvet scroll buzzed on her belt. She grabbed it and saw Coco's picture. She answered. Hey, Velvet said. I guess we're close enough to Shade CCC Tower to get a signal. It's weak down here, but hopefully enough. Coco's voice was breaking up. Velvet hurried back to the lines she had tossed over. A woman's head peered over the edge of the shell. Velvet reached down and helped her climb up. I've got it. The woman pushed away Velvet's hand as soon as she was standing on the shell and walked away from her. You're welcome, Velvet said. I only climbed up here and tossed you a rope to save your life and everything. Uh-oh, Velvet thought. She looked over and saw more people emerging from the dust below, ascending by holding onto the rope and walking up the side slowly. They were arguing and complaining, not acting at all like the people who were in the midst of a miraculous rescue. Are you just going to stand there? A red-haired woman stretched a hand out. Amaranth again, and her son in a sling wrapped onto her back. Velvet took her hand and pulled her up. You okay? Velvet asked. I can't do a raspberry right now. My mouth is too dry. She is a raspberry, Amaranth said. She unwrapped Ash from her back. Wasn't it enough that I carried you inside for 9 months? I wish you'd hurry up and carry your own weight. Velvet's eyebrows shot up. Coco, everything okay down there? Coco cursed at her. What do you think? She asked. I guess Fox came back with Edward, Velvet said. What? You say that? He's not? Haven't seen them yet. Folks up here are kind of moody, Velvet said. They're outright fighting down here, Coco said. If Edward isn't back, then what's making everyone act up like this again? It could just be the stress of facing a deadly sandstorm and the prospect of climbing up to the top of a mythic beast, Coco said. I mean, that's kind of putting me on edge. Velvet looked out to the horizon again. There was another dust cloud out there, coming from the south, back at the way they'd come. I think we have a situation developing, Velvet said. Another one? What else? Velvet snapped a photo with her scroll and sent it to Coco. Another sandstorm, she asked? A moment passed. Then Slate came on the phone with Coco. Storms don't move like that, Slate said. Looks like a blind worm to me. The fear in Slate's... Okay. Looks like a blind worm to me. The fear in Slate's voice was unlike anything Velvet had yet heard from the leader. Something leapt out of the small cloud. A long, black, spiky worm thing, with a fiery red eye in the center of its head, which also featured a circular maw with razor-sharp teeth. So, not blind then. But it was the largest Grim she had ever seen, easily as wide as an Nevermore from wing to wing, and the length of 6 Goliaths. The blind worm landed back in the sand, causing another cloud to ripple out, and then continued to burrow towards them, towards the largest source of negative emotions from miles around. Get up here, Velvet said. Get everyone up here now. We're working on it, Coco said. Although maybe we should stay on the ground after all if we're about to be attacked. Everyone else will be safer up here, Velvet said. If we can't defend our position, we'll engage the Grim and draw it away from the turtle and the group. But the most important thing is getting the others out of harm's way. Good call, Coco said. But are you really suggesting that we fight a giant worm on the back of a giant turtle? Velvet steeled herself for Coco to shoot it down as another silly notion. That's the idea, Velvet said. Coco smiled. Sounds like fun. That's the chapter. I'm going to read the super chat and take my drink because, yes. Ashbury donated $2 saying, what exactly did they reveal at RTX besides the new outfits and writers? Also, thoughts on the mid-credit scene from Far From Home. The writers, I thought, were... I'm nervous about the writers. And they didn't really announce anything new other than that. Besides that, the new novel, the fact that Volume 7 is coming out in November. So, I'm there's a lot about that I'm unsure about. The mid-credit scene in Far From Home, I had actually been spoiled on. A little bit, about the special cameo that showed up. And that's actually one reason that actually sent me to go see the movie. I wanted to go see it after I learned about that cameo, because, hell yeah. Which it was awesome to see that. That was amazing. And the big reveal at the mid-credits scene that kind of sets up the next big arc for Spider-Man. I'm eager to see where that goes. That could be very, very good, depending how they play that. And I'm wondering how if they're going to even get back to a status quo with him. Be very interesting to see. So let's see, how many pages do I have left? $11 pages by the look of it. I think it's 28, 29. Page 29 is the last one. Page 18. So yeah, 11 pages. All right, we have 11 pages before we call it a night, folks. Yeah, actually, depending. How many chapters are in this? We have what? Is there an index I can read quickly? It doesn't have an index. That always annoys me. Indexes are important, man. 13. Let's see. 13, 14, 15. 16. 17. 18. And I think epilogue. So, okay. With how short it looks like the next big segments are, let's see. 232 up through... 295. Well, I mean, if I push myself next time, I might be able to get through the entire book. Because I'm not getting through 14 tonight. Yeah, I can't get through 14 tonight. I'm too tired. Well, we're actually nearing the end. I might be able to get this done in one more stream, if not two. So chapter 13. Fox chapter. Fox was down. He lay with his face in the sand, his head throbbing. His right eye was swollen shut. He couldn't breathe. Something heavy, someone heavy, had just gotten the jump on him, and now they were gloating. "Get up," the voice said, "so I can finish you off fair and square." It was Bertilac Celadon. Sand and wind roared around them. The sand was already piling up on Fox. If he waited much longer, he would be buried. Fox pushed himself up on his hands and shook his head. The earbud fell out of his left ear. He scooped it up, but could tell it was broken. His right earbud was fritzing, fading in and out, as Ada tried to feed him information on the man who was trying to kill him. Opponent, 6 feet 6 inches tall, 225 pounds, very fit, weapons, ball mace, update, spiked ball mace, update, spiked ball mace with chain, likely projectile capabilities. A bang, and then the sand exploded in front of Fox. "You think?" Fox muttered. Fox's semblance was fading in and out too, which explained why he hadn't been able to detect Burlick's mind before he could attack. Fox's mouth was full of sand. He got up. He spat and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "You call ambushing me fair and square?" Fox said. "Over here." Fox turned to follow the sound of Bertilac's voice. The man was circling him in the sand.
His scroll's proximity alerts were going haywire because of the sand blowing around them, decreasing visibility and messing with the motion sensors. There was an old saying in Vacuo, listen to the desert. It was meant on a philosophical level that those who became one with the desert would survive in it. It also highlighted the fact that if you truly paid attention, you could hear and see that the desert wasn't as lifeless as it appeared to be. Fox tore at the earbud out of his ears and stuffed them in his pocket. He listened to the desert. When he concentrated, he thought he could hear Bertilac moving. He even thought he was able to judge the huntsman's position from the sound of the sand flying into him. Strangely, it reminded Fox of raindrops hitting the window pane in his room of Beacon. What are you planning for Edward, Bertilac? Fox asked. Bertilac laughed. Trying to keep me talking so you can keep track of me. Fox oriented on him again and confirmed that listening to the sand around them was effective as a crude sensor. Bertilac rushed towards him. Fox backed up in time and brought his arm blade down in time. Backed up in time and brought his arm blades down in time to deflect the blow from Bertilac's mace. See, like that could have been short up there. You only need one in time. He grabbed it for where he thought the chain was connected with it and pulled, but it slipped out of his hands. Something sharp dug in the fox's left forearm. Bertilac's mace dragged into the sand, splitting Fox's attention and making it harder to pinpoint where Bertilac and his weapon were. Why would you kidnap a defenseless old man? Defenseless? Edward protested. Fox turned slowly in the sand, following Bertilac's motion, so the huntsman would know he could follow him wherever he was, whether he was talking or not. Oh, that was weird to read. So the huntsman would know he could follow him whether he was talking or not. Meanwhile, he kept trying to send a message to Edward. Stop blocking our semblances. I need to be able to see him. I need to be able to talk to you, mind to mind. My boss is interested in people with powerful semblances, Bertilac said. Like someone who can create mood bombs and trigger grim attacks. But it looks like I got the wrong guy. I thought something was up with those two. Well played, old man. You work for me, Edward said. Bertilac laughed. We only convinced you to hire us so you could trust us and we could stay close until it was time to deliver you. You were taking him west, but you wanted to go to the city this whole time, Fox said. Unfortunately, we got saddled with protecting every damn settlement we ended up at. We've been trying to get the Caspians away from the main group, but Edward is pretty stubborn. Hey, who is your boss anyway? You don't know them, but judging by your team's abilities, they probably have a nice fat file on you, Bertilac said. That's creepy, Fox said. I don't care about Edward, Bertilac said, but I can't have you trying to stop me. You're going after Gus next, Fox realized. Believe it or not, he'll be safer with us, and all you will be safer without him around. Don't worry, we won't even charge you. Bertilac lunged forward and punched Fox in his left side before he could react. Fox bent over and covered his side. He staggered away, spinning around to make sure he was facing Bertilac again, where he had last heard Bertilac anyway. The problem was he didn't know the range of Bertilac's weapon. He couldn't dodge bullets either. Right now, Bertilac was playing with him. Fox's legs were swept out from under him, and he fell hard on his back. He rolled away, coughing on sand. Frustrated, he zipped towards Bertilac and slashed out with his arm blades. His left blade glanced off metal, but the right made contact, and Bertilac bellowed with pain and rage. Bertilac grabbed Fox's ankle and flung him away. Have to save Gus. Have to save Gus. Have to save Gus. Oh. Have to save Gus. Have to save Gus. Have to save Gus. It took Fox a moment to realize that he was picking up on Edward's thoughts. The channel was open, which meant he could now communicate with the older men, which meant Fox focused and fixed on Bertilac's position. His consciousness, a presence in Fox's mind, easy to pick out in a barren wasteland. The only other person close by with Edward, his thoughts sputtering and sparking but holding together. Beyond, Fox picked up on other smaller, lighter minds, a sort of background hum in the desert creature of the desert creatures sheltering from the storm under the sand, in hidden crevices and natural hollows in the rocks. Farther out, Fox felt the faint suggestion of other people. The tiny phantom connection with Coco, Yatsuhashi, and Velvet was enough to urge him on. Edward, listen, it's Fox, he sent. Fox? I need your help. If I can't see what Bertilac is doing, I can't fight him. That's a normal type. I don't know if he meant to have that as a telepathic transmission. The storm is pretty not bad now. I can't see more than 2 feet in front of me. That was good to know. If Bertilac couldn't see Fox either, they were more or less on even ground. Hold on, I just spotted him, Edward sent. What's the range on his weapon? Fox sent. He climbed back to his feet and headed towards Bertilac. The man had stopped moving. What was he waiting for? He can send the spike ball in his mace out about 7 feet, Edward said. Careful though, it also fires bullets. But he can only load one at a time, and he's low on ammo. Good. Anything else? Yeah, he's a real bastard. Even I can see that, Fox said. As Fox approached Bertilac, it seemed to be getting hotter and hotter. The sandstorm was still raging around them, though. The sun all but obscured in the sky, so what was causing this heat? It was radiating in waves from where Bertilac stood. The closer Fox got to him, the hotter it was. So that's his semblance, Fox thought. He thought back to the moments when the temperature inside had been more unbearable than outside. And Bertilac had always been close by. Apparently he could turn up the heat, especially when he was angry. Fox worried his teeth and pushed onwards. So I'll have to beat him quickly, Fox said, before the heat knocks me out. Good luck, Bertilac said. Fox felt him approaching, as much as from ambient heat shield as from his mental presence and the sand blowing around them. Fox and Bertilac circled each other. You're a disgraceful excuse for a huntsman, Fox said. Easy for you to say with all those lofty ideas Osmond and Theodore drilled into your head. Being a huntsman is a calling, is a privilege, not to be taken lightly. Fox had heard his professors at Beacon and Shade give exactly that speech. Bertilac spat. It was so hot, Fox heard liquid sizzle and evaporate as it hit the sand. They're just words. You think your headmasters and professors are model huntsmen? They're worse than all the rest of us. You want to know why I barely graduated? I was tired of being used as a tool. It was so hot. Fox was feeling feverish, weak, muddled. He couldn't keep this up much longer before succumbing to heat stroke. You're still a tool, Fox said. It got even hotter. Oops. On your left, Edward said. Fox dodged to the right, felt a wave of heat pass on his left. He struck upwards with his left blade, and Bertilac bellowed. You got him again, Edward said. Duck! Fox ducked, and then he turned into a forward roll, a hand spring, and his feet connected with Bertilac's face. Fox followed through with Fox followed through as Bertilac fell backwards. He heard Bertilac hit the sand. The temperature dipped slightly, just for a moment, but even those 2 degrees of relief felt amazing. Come on, boy, I've seen you fight Grim. This is no different, Edward said. Edward was right. If Bertilac had been a Grim, Fox would have been done with him by now. Sandstorm and heat notwithstanding. But there was one huge difference. He wasn't trying to kill Bertilac. In fact, he was specifically trying not to kill Bertilac. He had to finish this differently. He had to draw him closer and lull him into a false sense of security. How much more do I have? There we go. A few more pages. He's behind you, Edward said. Fox turned his head to left and right, as though he were trying to listen hard. He fired a shot from his weapon out into the desert, away from Bertilac and Edward. Can you hear me, Fox? He's practically on top of you, Edward sent. Damn it! Fox felt Bertilac close by. He heard him swinging the chain of his mace, and just as he expected, he felt the chain slip over his head. He brought his arm blades up just in time to prevent the chain choking around his throat. Bertilac squeezed, Fox pushed hard, and his tonfas helped him slip out of the embrace, slicing into Bertilac in the process. Bertolac bellowed and shoved Fox forward, making him stumble headfirst into the sand. "You're going to pay for that," Bertolac snarled. Fox spat sand out of his mouth as he rolled and leapt back onto his feet. Then he did a handspring towards Bertolac, his boots colliding with Bertolac's face. Bertolac groaned and fell backwards with emotion until Fox was sitting on his chest, knees pressing the man's arms down. Fox began punching. Fox's aura depleted with the force of each blow, but so did Bertolac's. Is it because he's expending aura to punch harder, or is it because, like, having the actual, Newton's laws enacted on his fist, it's actually damaging his fist as well? That's an interesting question, actually, now that I think about it. How does aura work with Newton's laws? Fox, and just before Fox reached a critical low, he felt Bertolac's aura shatter, followed a moment later by his nose shattering with a satisfying crunch. Bertolac screamed and heaved Fox off of him. He scrambled to his feet. Even without aura, the huntsman was still somehow on his feet, fight left in him. Fox tried to recover as he braced for a blow from Bertolac's weapon. One more hit and his own aura would shatter. Bertolac roared, and then Fox heard a metal clashing against metal. "Ready, old man?" Bertolac said through his broken nose. "That's a cool toy." "Really, old man?" Bertolac said through his broken nose. "That's a cool toy, but you're no match for me." Fox heard the two of them fight. He lay in the sand, willing himself to get up, but every time he did, he got dizzy. He tried to vomit, but all he coughed up was gritty sand he had inadvertently swallowed. His head pounded, and he kept forgetting where he was, and when he was, reliving childhood memories of living in vacuo. A rainstorm was a special treat, not only because it provided much-needed water for the nomads and desert plants and animals, but it also gave them enough water to make mud bricks for buildings. But they had to work quickly, shaping and setting the bricks before they dried in the heat and became too brittle. "I want to help," Fox said. "I can do it." "Darling, I know you can, but we don't have time to explain how to make them right now," Fox's father said. "It'll be faster if we do it ourselves," his mother agreed. "Why don't you go play on your own for a while?" Only the littlest kids played in the mud, making sandcastles instead of doing useful work. Fox was insulted, so he went off to prove his parents wrong. He would make the mud bricks and make a whole house of his own. He would show them. As he worked, the other kids came up to watch and make fun of his misshapen bricks, the lopsided structure he was building. Fox's face burned with embarrassment and anger, but he kept working. He would show them what he was capable of. While Fox worked, something terrible was happening nearby. The first sign he had was something was wrong was when the outer walls of his castle fell, and felt the vibrations in the earth. A quake? He knew whatever had raised it was big, and happened in the center of the settlement. He ran to warn everyone, but it was too late. Later, when Uncle Copper found him hiding among the remains of his mud house, more of a tomb-shaped mound, he heard a giant sinkhole had formed in the sand, caused by the sudden heavy rains. It had swallowed half of the settlement, including Fox's parents and their home, before the sand finally settled. Oddly, it was the fact that the desert had killed his family and friends that bothered Fox the most. That was what the desert did, and you couldn't blame it for... it wasn't the fact that the desert had killed his family. And you couldn't blame it for being what it was. Fox's own father had told him that after losing his own parents in a sandstorm when Fox was 4 years old. Every vacuan from the youngest to the oldest knew that and accepted the risks and dangers and had felt loss. Death was simply their way of life. No, what bothered Fox... These are the most emo people on this planet, aren't they? No, what bothered Fox most was that their deaths had been random, impersonal, meaningless, and they had been powerless to do anything about it. After grieving, a brief process in Vacuo where you had to literally pick up and move on, Fox had vowed to leave Vacuo one day and live someplace where he could protect people who couldn't protect themselves, where you had to fight, or where you had a fighting chance to survive. And he swore on his death, one day would have some purpose behind it. A knocking sound woke Fox, a banging. He rolled over and took a breath. He could breathe again. The temperature had cooled back to the desert's normal range, perhaps a bit cooler because of the particles in the air blocking the sun. The wind had died down, so he was no longer taking in mouthfuls of sand. Fox sat up. The banging sound of what that had woken him was metal on metal, accompanied by a guttural sound of pain. "Edward?" Fox sent. "Rise and shine," Edward sent back. "Looks like I've still got it, but I wouldn't expect it to last much longer." Edward cried out. "Mostly because I wouldn't expect me to last much longer." Fox climbed to his feet. He swayed, but his head was clearer, and he didn't feel like he was going to be sick again. He staggered towards the sound of combat. "How strong is this shield?" "How strong is this shield?" Bertilac yelled in between blows from his mace. "My arm will break before it does," Edward said. "Works for me." Bertilac picked up the pace. Fox softly crept up behind Bertilac. "Watch out behind you," Edward said. "Like I'm following for that," Bertilac said. Fox wrapped his right arm in a chokehold around Bertilac's throat, pulling him off Edward. His arm blade prevented Bertilac from reaching up to grab at him. He struggled for a bit, then jabbed backwards with the handle of his mace, knocking Fox backwards. Bertilac coughed. "Good one, kid." From the sounds of his voice, he had turned to face Fox. Fox heard the chain extend and went into his fighting stance, arms up, blades out. "Blades out for Harambe. Blades out for Harambe." In the suddenly quiet desert, still recovering from the storm that had passed through, sounds took on a new quality. The creak and leather of Bertilac's clothing, the sand shifting as he moved, the whirling of the spike ball on its chain. Fox listened to the desert. When the whirling sound changed, Fox got ready. Instead of dodging the incoming weapon, he went towards Bertilac. He brought both his blades up over his head and slammed them with all his might, cutting through the chain. The ball went flying off into the desert, and Bertilac sprawled from the sudden shift in weight. Fox caught him and pushed him down as he brought his knee up to connect with Bertilac's chest, then knocking him back. Bertilac came for him again, attacking with the handle of his broken weapon. Fox easily parried the blows and got a couple of punches in. He heard Edward bashing Bertilac with his shield from behind. Then Bertilac was retreating while Fox and Edward traded blows with him, side by side. 2-on-1? 2-on-1? What would Theodore say? Bertilac said. He'd say it's payback for ambushing a blind guy and an old man in a desert, Fox said. Yeah, but you can fight, Bertilac said. Flattery will get you. Fox turned and delivered a roundhouse kick that made a soft contact with Bertilac's thick head. Flattened. Bertilac did not get up. Finally, Edward said. Now I can sit down. Fox found Bertilac's hands and feet, bound Bertilac's hands and feet with rope from his own pack, and then grabbed his scroll. He wanted to find out who Bertilac was working for. He collapsed next to Edward. The old man clapped a hand on his back. Fox winced. Everything hurt, but it also felt good. He suddenly missed his Uncle Copper. Fox hadn't even tried to find his old settlement and his people, Kensei, since moving back to Vacuo. He decided he would when they were done with this mission. He wanted to introduce his two families to each other. You did it, my boy, Edward said. We did it. Are you all right? My buckler's seen better days, and I think my wrist is fractured, but I haven't felt this good in a long time. My head feels clearer somehow from the fighting. I suddenly remember things I'd forgotten. Like what? I knew something was up with Bertilac and Carmine. I knew they weren't behaving like real huntsmen. Edward snapped his knee. I remember when I called for help, I brought you here. You did? Fox asked. He didn't know whether the man was being delusional again, but he did seem lucid, and someone had called Shade Academy for assistance. Maybe they hadn't come forward because they hadn't remembered doing so. The mind could be such a funny thing, especially out in the desert. Bertilac and Carmine. They knew what they were causing those emotional bombs. They knew that we were causing the emotional bombs. The old man kicked the light dusting of sand in Bertilac's direction. I hired these fools to take us up to safety, but over time I realized they weren't taking us west at all, at least not directly. By the time I figured that out, though, we were already in the desert and the Grimm were following us. We needed the huntsman to survive, so I figured I'd try to distress call, see if it brought anyone in. Your plan worked, Fox handed Bertilac's scroll to Edward. Can you find anything useful on this? Ideally the name of the Bertilak's boss. Never cared for these things myself, Edward said. Luckily, no password. Why would a big, strong huntsman need a password? He probably thought he was all the security he'd ever need, Fox said. Or Carmen got tired of him asking what asking her what his password was. He isn't exactly the brains of the operation. Carmine, she was Bertilak's partner. He wouldn't have been keeping his intentions towards Edward and Gus to himself. He wouldn't have been able to. She was way too smart. Crap. Check the call log. Has Bertilak been in communication with Carmine since he brought you out here? He heard Edward tap the screen. He sent a message about 20 minutes ago, Edward clicked it. They tricked us. E is useless. I'll ditch him. You get G to the boss. I'll catch up. To the text read. Edward groaned and got up, his bones crackling and popping. We have to get back to the others. Standing was the last thing Fox wanted to do right now, but he got up anyway. There was no telling what Carmine would do, especially if the rest of Fox's team put up a fight to protect Gus. Help me with Bertilak, Fox said. Help you with what? Bury him? Edward asked. No, carry him. Let's just leave him here. He'll die on his own like this. He deserves worse. He'll slow us down. Fox shook his head. We don't leave people behind, even people like him. Edward sighed. Is that what they're teaching huntsmen these days at the academies? It's just something a true huntsman knows already, right? Fox asked. Edward was quiet for a moment. But what if they're really heavy? Alright, that's a good ending joke. I don't know how I feel, because they could just call. Why don't they just call? I mean, his scroll still works, so he could call Coco in that range if they're within range to send a message. Right? Theoretically? So maybe they'll get a message in the middle of their fight with the blind worm, which has a really unoriginal name. They should call it like, what was the planet from Dune? Or they just call it a Dune worm. Why not? Just go full sandworm on it. Go full Icarus? Was it Icarus? What is the frickin' planet in Dune? Planet in Dune. Yeah, it is Icarus. Arrakis, sorry. They should call it an Arrakis. I think that would be a much more... an actual reference. I think that would be fun. His phone wasn't dead, though, I don't believe. And they have Bertilak's phone. He probably knows Coco's number. Someone's number. That said, thank you all so much for staying here for Let's Read RWBY After the Fall Part 4. And I would love to thank every single one of my patrons and remind you that the Patreon link is down below, though most of you are already probably patrons or aware of that as well. Thank you all so much for coming to watch, and I hope you've been enjoying yourselves. Please do remember to share this video around so others may enjoy it as well, especially when it goes public, because it goes into unlisted for some reason automatically. Very strange. Very strange. Once more, I believe it's the third time, thank you all so much for watching, and I will catch you all on the flip side.